Hey, everybody, welcome back to another fantastic edition of the His and Her Money Show, where we make it our business to help you take dominion over your money and your life. Thank you for tuning in. We are grateful to have you here. You're going to love today's episode because we're going to be talking about entrepreneurship. So many of you all are in the fight for entrepreneurship, or you're sitting on some ideas that you've been wanting to turn into a full-fledged business. Well, before you do that, or if you're in the grind already, this is definitely an episode that you want to hear. We have a longtime friend waiting in the wings to give us some knowledge on this because he's an entrepreneur. He and his wife have built multiple successful seven-figure businesses, but they've learned some very important lessons along the way that we need to learn about. And he's written a brand new book called Family First Entrepreneur. His name is Steve Chou, and he has so much wisdom on entrepreneurship that you're going to want to have your pen and paper ready or have your notes app open to be able to capture all the nuggets that Steve is going to drop on us. So get ready. Don't say I didn't warn you, because it's about to come your way. So let's go get Steve so we can hear all of his incredible wisdom on this very, very important topic. Hey, Steve, welcome to the His and Her Money Show.
Man, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
We are glad to have you here on the His and Her Money Show. Here's a fun fact. All right. We've been podcasting for 8-ish years. We would not have a podcast had it not been for the My Wife Quit Her Job podcast tutorial. That is
Get out of town, really?
Absolute fact. That is how this show started. And every time somebody asks me, hey, man, how do I get started? You know what I do, Steve? I send them the tutorial. That same tutorial. So kudos to you just out the gate for always adding value to people from the inception of the work that you've done. But listen, enough about me. Some people are being introduced to you for the very first time right here and right now. So for them, can you say hello to them and then kind of let them know what you are all about?
Yeah, I'll give this short version. My name is Steve, and I run a blog called mywifequitherjob.com that teaches e-commerce and entrepreneurship. And I got started in business when my wife told me that she wanted to quit her job in order to stay at home with the kids. And when I grew up, I didn't see my parents as much as I would have liked. So I was fully on board with it. Only problem is we live in the Silicon Valley, super expensive to live here. You pretty much need two incomes in order to get a good house and a good school district. And at the time, my wife, she worked for a Fortune 500 company. She was making six figures. And so we had to find a way to replace that lost income. And in order to do that, we ended up selling handkerchiefs online. Pretty random. So I'll just give you the quick backstory there. We decided to sell handkerchiefs because when my wife and I got married, she cries a lot whenever she's happy. And so we looked all over the place for handkerchiefs so she could dry her tears so the photos turned out well. It was like a pure vanity play, I think. What ended up happening was we couldn't find any handkerchiefs in the US. And then we found this factory in China. The minimum order was a couple hundred. So we bought a couple hundred, used maybe a handful of them, sold the rest on eBay, and they sold like hotcakes. So back when she told me she was going to quit 3 years later, I was like, hey, let's just give this handkerchief thing a try. And so we launched the store, ended up doing six figures in profit in the first year. My wife quit in good conscience. I then started documenting this on a blog because my friends were like, hey, how did you do this? Like, I want to quit. So I started the blog, and that was like my journal for my business. None of my friends ended up reading it, but just random people started following my journey. That led to a podcast, that led to a YouTube channel, that led to an annual e-commerce conference, that led to a training class. And here we are today.
Speaking of today, we're here today because of some hard-earned lessons that you and your wife learned along that entrepreneurial journey that you've been on, and it kind of puts you in a position to write a brand new book called The Family First Entrepreneur. Just the title alone is like, wait a minute, how do you weave all those words together into one phrase? Because there's so much dialogue around entrepreneurship, and rarely do you hear dialogue about family. You hear hustle, you hear grind, you hear team, you hear build, you hear strategy. You don't really hear about putting your family first in your entrepreneurial journey. So talk to me about how'd you come to this conclusion, this topic for this book?
Yeah. I mean, the reason why I wrote this book is because I'm an entrepreneur and I read a lot of business books, but I always felt like they didn't really apply to me because if you look at most of the business books out there today, most of them are written by single dudes who have no responsibilities, no kids, and they can work 80 hours a week, right? So when someone tells me that you got to hustle, hustle, hustle and work 80 hours a week, I'm thinking to myself, I got a family. I got two kids. I actually want to see them. I actually want to see my wife. And so most business books didn't really apply to me. And I was thinking to myself, hey, I'm able to do this. I run two seven-figure businesses, working less than 20 hours a week. There's a better way to do things. Now, granted, if your goal is to start like the next $100 million company, like an Amazon or a Facebook, you probably do need to work 80 hours a week and have a huge team. But if all you want to do is make a living or make a couple $1 million, you can easily do that without a large staff and certainly without working 80 hours a week.
Now, it almost seems unreal, Steve. You said out of your mouth right here just a few minutes ago. You said, I run, my wife and I, not one, but two seven-figure businesses. And I don't work 80 hours a week. I only work 40 hours a week. I work 20 hours a week. For somebody who just immediately got skeptical about the potential of replicate, maybe he just got lucky with these handkerchiefs. Maybe he just found lightning in a bottle. Is this something that can be replicated?
It can be, but I mean, to be straight up, there is an element of luck in everything that we do, right? Let's take e-commerce, for example. There's a couple of things that were pretty lucky. My brother-in-law just happened to be working for Google at the time in the AdWords division, and he taught me how to write ads or make ads. I had a friend who just launched a store selling his photography, spent $0 doing so, and I was like, "Hey, cool. Can you teach me how you launched your store?" And keep in mind, this was back before Amazon, back before Shopify and all that stuff. And I was lucky enough to have these friends and contacts that helped me along the way. I had another friend who was ranking in search back in the day, and he was like, "Hey, all you need to do is just write some content. You'll rank and you'll get organic traffic." And he taught me some of the fundamentals, and I did them. So there's a lot of luck in business, but I think the most important thing is that you actually have to do something with the knowledge or that luck that you get.
That's it. You have to do something with the knowledge. A lot of information is available today, more than any other time in history. And I think at times it's very easy to become a consumer of knowledge and not an executor of strategy. Have you come across that with the people that you've helped along the way where they enjoy the process of dreaming? Maybe they even enjoy the process of the acquisition of knowledge. But then when it's time for the rubber to meet the road, because you said in all these situations, you had a conversation with people, they sat down with you, they gave you a strategy, but then you have to walk it out. Why do we get stuck in that crosshairs or that crossroads of going from knowledge acquisition to strategy implementation?
Yeah, and one thing I just want to say straight up, like I make all that money working 20 hours a week today. Was not like that in the beginning. And nor should your expectations be like that. It's just a many years of gradual refinement and automating my systems and everything in order to get to the point I am. Now, the reason why most people don't don't follow through, quite frankly, I think the media is to blame. Like if you hear all the stories out there on podcasts of people making a lot of money in a short period of time, that conditions yourself to think that way. Hey, wow, I can do this in 6 months, or I can do this in 3 months. And when you have those unrealistic expectations, 3 or 6 months will pass. And you'll be like, I didn't get there. Clearly, I'm doing something wrong. I should give up. In my book, you need to, if you're going to start something, you need to stick with it for at least 3 to 5 years, or at least 1 year. Follow through for at least 1 year. Because a lot of times, and let me just talk about my blog here. When I started my blog, I didn't make any money for 2 years, like zero. It was only after 2 years when I actually started to see a little bit of money. And then 3 years, I hit six figures, but then it just hockey sticks after that. A lot of times you just got to stick with something without any expectations because good things will happen over time. I always think of life like playing the lottery. The people that you meet, you get more lottery tickets. The more work you put in, you get more lottery tickets. And at some point, you increase your chances so high that you're just bound to succeed.
So now, you've been kind of waving this banner for a little while about creating a business where you can still put your family first and still do the things, because you talk about in your book how a lot of us, we get into business because we are looking for freedom. We're looking for the ability to have the flexibility to do the things that we care about with the people that we love. Then we get into it and we just get in grind mode and hustle mode, and it becomes we're chasing this arbitrary number that's just something to make us kind of have a notch in our belt. So what do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have as you try to educate them on the concept of the family first entrepreneur? How do you address those misconceptions?
I mean, the first misconception is the number, right? I'm going to hit this number and then I'm just going to sip Mai Tais on the beach. That's not true. So if you're not used to making a lot of money or having a sudden windfall of money, like I remember when I made that first 100,000 that I was talking about, I got this fever. All of a sudden, I just wanted to make more. So every single year, I would start setting these goals like, hey, next year we're going to make 30% more, 30% more, 30% more. Meanwhile, we were only spending like a quarter of what we were making. We didn't need the money. But here I was driving my wife crazy with these unrealistic goals. We would hit them and then we would celebrate maybe for a day. And then I would set the goalposts further out. And it got to this point where I was driving her nuts and she broke down and she said, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't fun. And we don't even spend the money that we make. So what's the point? And I think that if you're going to go into business, it's really easy to fall into this trap unless you know what makes you happy and the purpose for what you're doing things are, why you're running the business. So let's talk about those two things real quick. So one, you got to figure out how much you spend in order to live a comfortable life. Whatever that number is, maybe you just double it. And that's like the number where everything else is gravy. And then two, you need to remember the purpose for your business. Like we started it in the beginning so that we could spend more time with family. And you have to remember those things. Um, when my wife broke down that day and she told me all those things, we had a long talk about the purpose for our business. And we set some guidelines. So no more revenue goals. Like what's the point? Like once you make enough based on what you spend, most people don't need private jets and that sort of thing, right? Like if you ask most people, why they want to start a business, it's really just for freedom. And they just want to make enough so they don't have to worry about the money anymore. I don't think anyone goes into business, or most people don't go into business expecting to make 100 million bucks. They just want freedom. And so you just got to know what makes you happy. Just give you some examples here. For me, I'm not a complicated dude and I'm pretty frugal. Like I don't buy things. I don't need stuff. That's not what makes me happy. In my ideal week, ideal week, it's if I have lunch with my wife a couple times a week, if I go on walks with the kids, if I get in some exercise, so I lift, I play ultimate, and I play tennis. If I can get those things in a week, that's actually a good week for me.
So it's important for us to identify, even though when you're have the entrepreneurial mind, it's easy to identify goals and benchmarks business wise that you want to hit, which is not a bad thing unless it becomes almost an idol. But along with developing that, you need to develop what's important to you from a lifestyle perspective. Like you talked about playing tennis, walks with your children, and lunches with your wives. And then you have to use all of those things to make a plan and a strategy for how you're going to grow, build your business. Is that what I'm understanding?
Exactly. I mean, because if you don't know what makes you happy, then you're just going to spend your time doing everything, right? And that's actually not possible. Are you, Talat, are you familiar with the four burners theory at
The
all?
four,
Four burners theory?
no.
Okay, let me just give a brief overview here. The four burners theory states that your life is composed of four burners: family, work, friends, and health. In order to do one thing well, you have to turn off at least one burner. If you want to do something really well, you got to turn off two. And if you're Elon Musk, you probably have three burners turned off and your work burner is way up. Basically, the theory is about sacrifice and priority. You can't do everything. So if you want to spend more time with your family, then maybe that means you got to dial down the work burner or the health burner. Hopefully not the health burner or the friends burner. And just by understanding that, it really forces you to prioritize. Another way to think about it is, we're all juggling a lot of different things every day. You have to identify which of the balls that you're juggling are made out of glass and which ones are made out of rubber, and just make sure you don't drop the glass ones.
Hmm, that's good. That's good, man. Now let's deal with entrepreneurship, because not only have you and your wife created multiple businesses, but you've also helped others do the same. What do you think in today's landscape, 2023? The world kind of changed a lot a few years ago. What do you think are some underrated skills that entrepreneurs need to develop in order to be successful in today's business landscape?
I think the most important skill actually is to learn how to sell.
Okay.
I used to be an electrical engineer, and all I did was stare in front of this monitor, looking at waveforms and stuff. I didn't really talk to anyone. I was afraid to sell. And I was brought up, maybe it's because I'm Asian, I was brought up to just work hard, do a really good job, and people will notice you. That's not really how the world works. You have to sell yourself, you have to ask for what you want. And once I developed those skills, just business became easy. Because if you know how to present products and services in such a way that makes it attractive to somebody, that's the most important skill in business. It almost doesn't even matter what you sell. Let me give you an example here. Like most of the things that are being sold today are all commodities, right? There's no real true inventions today from most people, from what most people sell. Uh, have you ever heard of the company Dr. Squatch?
No.
They sell soap.
Okay.
They sell soap for men. Okay. You would think to yourself, soap, right? Oh, yeah, another soap company. Like I can just go to the mall or I can go to the store and just get soap, right? What's really clever is that these guys over at Dr. Squatch aren't really selling soap. And if you watch one of the commercials, and I'll just give you an example of what a commercial is like. It's a guy and his girlfriend, where the girlfriend's like, "Oh my God, you smell so good. I just want to jump you." They aren't really selling soap, they're selling sex, essentially, right? So really just how you frame what you're trying to sell, it doesn't really matter so much what you're selling. How you frame it is what matters. The emotions that you can instill in somebody.
Now, since that's such an important skill, one that you have to learn yourself, do you have any tips or advice on how someone who doesn't necessarily consider themselves a salesman or the best salesman or woman can become better at it, since this is a skill that we're going to need?
Yeah, I mean, I teach a class on it, but I don't want to, pitch my class on this
No, pitch a
podcast. But
class. People need help.
okay, I mean, if you guys are interested in learning how to sell physical products, I have a class over at profitableonlinestore.com. Uh, and then I also teach a content class also over at Profitable Audience that'll teach you how to do blogging, YouTube, or podcasting in that class. If there's some books, like there's some books that have been really influential in my life also. There's this book called Cashvertising, which involves, how to trigger the emotions in order to get someone to sell. Another one of my favorite books is Cialdini, The Psychology of Influence, an excellent book as well, in addition to the one that I just put out called The Family First Entrepreneur.
Another thing that I think is tricky along the lines of selling is pricing, trying to figure out what's the right price. I want to, I want to make it affordable to everybody, or I want to make it elite, whatever your frame of thought is. Pricing is always tricky. Over the years, for you and all the things that you've sold along the way, what's advice do you have on navigating that, whether that's the internal part of trying to, wrestle with imposter syndrome, or whether that's the external, trying to be competitive in the marketplace? Do you have any advice or wisdom that you can give to entrepreneurs when it comes to trying to figure out pricing for what it is that you are selling?
Yeah, I mean, my advice is always to target the high end. And the other thing I always advise is just make yourself different. You don't always have to be better, you just have to be different. And by targeting the high end, that gives you so much more margin to do a better job at what you do. So let me give you an example here. Okay, let's say you're out to hire a plumber, all right? And most of the plumbers charge $50 an hour, let's just say. And all of a sudden you see this plumber that charges 25. What you'll find is that, like, in order to do that 25, they're probably skimping a lot of things and the experience isn't going to be as good. Whereas if you get someone who charges $100, all of a sudden they have all this extra margin to make it like the best experience possible. And then when you have a really good experience, your tendency is to share that plumber with other people. Word of mouth is very powerful. And so you always want to target the high end and charge more so you can provide a much better experience that fosters word of mouth. It just makes everything easier. Advertising is easier, customer service is easier. I'll give you an example with the products in our store. We sell handkerchiefs in our store and we charge a lot of money for them. But guess what? When we have an angry bride calling us, complaining about something, we just say, hey, you'll get a full refund, just keep the product. And then all of a sudden, when they hear that, it's funny because they instantly become all nice. And then they're like, oh my God, we're just going to share your store with everyone we know. You're the best. So it just makes life a lot easier when you can charge more.
All right. So now let's talk about something that you kind of touched on earlier when you were talking about the fact that you put in a lot of work up front and then you made some adjustments along the way, one of which is automation. You put automation inside of the structure of your business. Speak to why that's important, and do you have any practical tips that people can start thinking? Because a lot of us, we start businesses and we spend so much time working in the business that we don't have time to work on the business. We're literally doing everything. So the thought of handing over the reins to certain aspects of our business can be a scary undertaking mentally for some people. So talk about your journey into letting go of some things and putting automation in place, which led to a better business for you all.
Yeah. So the first thing, if you want to make more money and work less, it's all about leverage. Anything that I do has to have outsized gains. Before we get in the automation part, I just want to say a couple things. Um, most people these days are on social media, right? In order to be successful on social media, you have to post constantly. My friends who are successful on social media, on Instagram, for example, she posts 7 times a day. I have friends who are successful on Facebook, they post 21 times a day. And guess what? When they stop posting, the traffic stops, right? To me, social media is a hamster wheel. So instead, I like to focus on higher leverage things like SEO. That's why YouTube is so powerful. Like, I have posts that I've written on my blog that have been getting traffic for the last 10 years. I have videos on YouTube that have been getting me traffic for the last 3 years. Anytime you can do one thing and have it continuously work for you is much more ideal. On the automation end, one of my philosophies is to hire only as a last resort and try to rely on software and automation as much as possible. We just happen to be living in a golden era right now of AI and ChatGPT. I actually recently, got rid of a few of my writers because ChatGPT actually does a better job. Um, it can be really glamorous to have a large team, but I used to be an engineering director. And even though my workers were fantastic, what most people don't realize is there's this mental overhead of having employees, and machines don't talk back. Software doesn't talk back, and it's much easier to manage. So I always try to find a piece of software to solve the problem. And if not, I'll code it myself. And if you don't know how to code, you can find someone who can. And chances are there's some solution out there that can automate the majority of what you need. Now, in the event that you have to hire somebody, which is a lot of times inevitable, I always learn how to do that skill first myself before I hire it out. And once I do hire it out, the work that I have my people do, I make sure they document everything. I make them write their own SOPs. And in such a way so that if they were to leave, I could get someone else in there, have those SOPs in place, and pick up where they left off.
Now, it sounds like in order for you also to continue to thrive entrepreneurially and continue to have a model that is a family first entrepreneurial model, that you have to be organized. When you become an entrepreneur, obviously in the 9 to 5 world, you have certain hours that you're mandated to work from this time to this time, this day and this day. When you're an entrepreneur, you are in charge of your own schedule, which sounds ideal until you start doing it. You realize you're in charge of your schedule. And it's easy to end up working, or at least sitting at your computer for what seems like longer periods of time. But are you being effective, or are you all over the place? So, are you super organized with your days? I assume that I know the answer. I'm going to let you answer. And how do you like? What do you put in place to make sure that the time that you're putting in, those 20 hours, are you're maxing them out to get the full work out of yourself that your business needs?
I mean, I don't want to portray myself as the most organized person. Like if you compare myself to my wife, she's way more organized. Uh, and to be straight up with you, like I don't think I can work more than 20 hours a week right now because my kids are teenagers and in the afternoons, usually I'm shuttling them around. They play club volleyball. The weekends are pretty much shot. Like last week, the last 2 weekends, I was in Reno, like all weekend, just in their volleyball tournaments. So it's just kind of a limitation that you have as a parent. Um, I have everything kind of structured in terms of a schedule. And the way I typically work is I have certain times set aside in the day or in a certain day to get something done. So, for example, Monday is when I get all of my content done. So I'll publish a podcast, a blog post, and a YouTube channel. And I try to get everything done actually on Monday if I can. And then Tuesday and Wednesday, really, I cater to the class that I teach. And then I always make sure I leave one day out of the week just for thinking, not doing. And this is once I started doing this, this is actually the biggest helper of them all because during that one day, I can take a high level view of what I'm doing and plan out the following week, which just makes everything much more efficient. We waste a lot of time. I mean, as people, we waste a lot of time also. It's about figuring out what your time wasters are and how badly you want it, really. Because I hate when people tell me they don't have enough time when they're like binge watching Netflix, for example. You know what I'm saying? So
And how do you prioritize? There's a phrase, income generating activities, because you mentioned earlier, like, people, in order to keep the wheels turning in their brand, they got to post multiple times a day to Instagram, multiple times a day to Facebook. And at times, those all that energy, all those posts don't necessarily all generate income. Some do, as opposed to building a product, teaching a class. But it feels like in this day and age that the social media piece has to be a part. And I think a lot of times we put more energy over there, non-income generating activities, as opposed, and then we give leftover energy to activities that generate income. What's your philosophy there? Where does your energy go when it comes to those worlds?
I mean, you already know how I feel about social media. Uh, I think people use social media because it's free and it's a good way to get out there. But I just think of it like a hamster wheel. Really, I do. Uh, so you actually won't find me on social media with huge followings and whatnot. I focus on high leverage activities, things where I can do once and have it reap the rewards in the long run. Now, I'm not saying social media is not a good strategy. It is, and clearly it makes a lot of money for a lot of people. But I've been in a lot of mastermind groups over the years, and I've interviewed a whole bunch of different entrepreneurs. I don't think anyone enjoys social media, like enjoys like the tediousness of posting on there. They just think of it as something that just needs to be done. I, I am a firm believer that in any business, you can probably get by without social media if you want to. It's just social media is easier today, and a lot of people are on it. I would say that if you want to do social media and you don't want to be trapped on this hamster wheel, you probably need to hire that out somehow, right? Figure out what your voice is going to be, and then you got to trust that person to be able to represent you. Let me just give you a couple examples of that. I've been dabbling with like I do YouTube videos. Um, I've been dabbling with hiring someone to just break apart some of those videos and maybe some of the podcast interviews that I do into smaller clips that can be used for social media. That's a pretty safe way of outsourcing that. But again, they got to have good taste, right? They got to be able to pick out the good clips and it's not really something that's really easily explainable.
Yeah. I'm also curious about, because your heart posture is to do business in a way, create a business in a way that you can do the things that you love. So how you talked about how you schedule your days from a business aspect. Do you take that same approach and incorporate into things that are meaningful to you, time with your kids, time with your spouse, personal time for yourself?
I mean, I don't really schedule those things in because that's what I do by default. You know what I'm saying? Like work, I schedule in because I need to get that done. All the time with the kid, like I almost spend too much time with the kids. I'll be straight up. Like I tell them, I'm like, you realize that our family and the way we interact is unusual, right? Like most people don't see their parents all day long. Um, so, and just to be straight up, like my kids don't want to hang out with me all the time, right? And it goes both ways. But I think it's just important to be present. Like I remember, I used to play club volleyball myself, which is one of the reasons why my kids play. And my parents, they're first generation immigrants, and they worked really hard, and they couldn't go to all my games. And I would look on the sidelines after I made a good play, and they weren't there, and that kind of had a lasting effect on me. So I just try to be present. Really,
That's super
I
dope.
don't need to schedule family time. I just have arguably too much of it.
I love that. Now,
Yeah.
you've been on this journey for a while. How would you do it differently if you were getting ready to launch today in 2023 with all the things that you've learned from the way that you actually did the journey you actually been on? And, you do a bunch of research and you've taught a bunch of people. So if you were the person that's on the other side of the lens or the microphone with the headphones in right now, and they have an idea and they're listening to you, they're about to go pick up a copy of your brand new book, The Family First Entrepreneur, and they're getting ready to try to get this thing off the ground. If you were sitting in their shoes, what are some key things that you would do now that you didn't do back then?
Sure. Let's just talk in broader terms first, and then I'll answer your question more specifically. I think that if you want to start a business that can make money within a year, you need to sell something. This is why I think e-commerce is more ideal. You're selling a product to somebody. If your time horizon is longer, I would say 2 to 3 years, I think content and specifically video is probably the best way to go. You might not make that much money in the beginning, but at some point it'll hockey stick. Okay. So along those lines, and we're talking in terms of broad terms and in terms of business here, I think in this day and age, I think doing something in video is actually quite important. Just think about how artificial intelligence is disrupting everything. Like I just told you earlier that I got rid of a couple of my writers because AI is a really good writer. I think video and your personality is just one thing that really can't get disrupted. So if I were to do a content business, I would do video. If I were to make money in e-commerce, as I mentioned earlier, you just need to be different and you just need to understand how to trigger the emotions on what you sell. Like what you sell is less important than how you frame it. I can give you some examples with our store. Like we sell handkerchiefs, right? A handkerchief is just a piece of fabric, but we frame it as a wedding handkerchief. People buy these for weddings to commemorate their occasions. And so if you can like reframe what you're selling in such a way that in our case, we do it based on an occasion, you can just make money selling anything. So those are the things I would be focusing on. Like learn more about human psychology and what triggers someone to sign up for a product or a service. And do video if you can, if you go the content route.
Now you've mentioned this. We are in that at the time of this recording, AI is all the rage, specifically Chat GPT. And I've been reading and watching and listening to a bunch of content around this stuff as well. So since you not only, I mean, you from the computer world vocationally, and you were trained in it. I hear, about using these different tools like Chat GPT to help you creating content. But I also hear like there's also AI tools that detect if your stuff was created with the influence of Chat GPT. And I'm reading like Google's changing the way that they're indexing searchability. So how do we use these tools responsibly in a way that we won't be penalized for? I guess is my question.
Yeah. So Google actually publicly stated, I think in March, that AI content's okay. But if you read between the lines, they probably don't like it if your website's like all AI content. So I think you have to have a human element in there because the AI could be wrong. So you need someone human in there to fact check everything. And you also need a human in there to give a little bit of personality to the writing. So if you use a hybrid model, I don't think there's any risk really. And if you feel like there could be a risk, there are tools like originality.ai, for example, that you can run through that will detect AI content or duplicate content.
Cool. Good stuff. Now, as we get ready to move forward in the conversation, I would like you to talk a little bit more about the way that you outlined the book, because I want everybody that has the heart to start a business or to improve their business to go pick up a copy of your new book, The Family First Entrepreneur. So, just can you share a little bit about what you put in the book that will help them along their journey?
Yeah, so first off, even though the book is called The Family First Entrepreneur, it's not just for people with families. Essentially, the book is about how to work less and make more. And it's really designed for people in all walks of life. The book is divided into two main sections. The first one is about getting started. In the event that you don't have a side hustle yet, then the first part will teach you how to get started, figure out what your strengths are, and help you come up with a product or a service to sell. I sincerely believe that everyone needs to have a side hustle. If you look at where I live right now in the Silicon Valley, there have been mass layoffs at all the firms, and there's a lot of people out of a job right now. And if you get caught in a layoff or whatnot and you have nothing, you could be in a world of hurt. So that's what the first section is about, making sure you have different seeds spread around. And some of these things can be really small. You never know when something's going to take off. Like we didn't even know that our handkerchief store was going to take off. We just kind of planted that seed and just saw where it went, and it happened to blow up. Right. Same thing with content. The second part of the book is about sustaining. And as I mentioned before, it's really easy to get caught in the fever once you start making money. Ironically, starting the business is the easy part. Maintaining it and leveraging it so that you're not working yourself to death is actually the harder part. So the second part of the book is about systems, workflows, some of the philosophies that we talked about in this episode on how to leverage your time more effectively so that you make the most amount of money for the amount of work that you're putting in and where to be spending your time.
Good stuff, man. As we're talking about time and as we're talking about being effective and making sure that we don't work ourselves to burnout, another thing that you're big on is outsourcing. And again, because of the internet, there's a whole lot of tools that can help you outsource. There's a whole lot of freelance marketplaces and things of that nature. But um, everything out there ain't quality, Steve. All the freelancers out there don't always live up to what you need done. You talked earlier about how you're on the hunt for somebody to be able to competently take some of your long form videos and create short form content out of it. Do you have any advice on, well, A, talk to us about the importance of outsourcing if we want to scale, and then B, what are some boundaries that you have in place when you're on the search for a freelancer or a partnering with a company to outsource some of the work from off of your workload?
I mean, what's always worked the best for me over the years was just finding someone with a really good attitude and then teaching them what I want them to do. Like they don't need like any inherent skills. I just tell them I'm going to teach you. You just have to have a great attitude. Because I think at least for the stuff that we outsource, you don't really have to have years of schooling and whatnot to do it, right? It's just I want this done a certain way and you can pick it up on the way. Attitude's the most important. Um, the other thing, so whenever we hire someone, we actually pay, we just usually get a whole bunch of candidates and we just pay them to do the work and we just pick the best ones and stick with them. The other thing I also want to mention is most people, when they're thinking about hiring, they're like, oh my God, it's so expensive and I got to make sure that they all have work, to keep them fed. As you mentioned before, thanks to the internet, you can find someone anywhere in the world. And a place right now, and I hope it stays this way for a while, is to outsource over to the Philippines because they all speak English over there as their first language essentially, and they all have such good attitudes about work. Like I would say my employees in the Philippines are better than the ones in the US in terms of attitude. And it might be a cultural thing, who knows? Um, but they're always going above and beyond. And that's the type of personality that you want as an employee. And it can be hard to find that attitude, and it's just something that I'm not good at spotting it in an interview. It's just something where you have to give someone work and just see how they respond.
Are there certain because some people they may like, wait, what? You can hire somebody in the Philippines? How do you do that, Steve?
There's a site called onlinejobs.ph. Great way to do it. If you're in the e-commerce space, there's a company called secondoffice.co where they will literally find someone who's qualified for you, and you don't even have to do that many interviews. You just tell them what you need, they'll find someone for you. And I remember we hired the first person that we found from that service. And I remember going to my wife going, should we really just hire the first person that we interviewed? Like, is that right? Should we talk to some more people? We hired her and she's been with us for over 5 years now.
Wow, that's fantastic. You are a champion of the e-commerce model of business. Is e-commerce something anybody can do, or is it something that is good for a certain type of individual?
I mean, anyone can do it. It's just selling something, right? I mean, it's like going to the store and selling something. It doesn't really, thanks to a whole bunch of tools out there, there's not even that much tech involved anymore because there's companies that write the tech for you. You just have to be good at selling it. So yeah, anyone can do it.
Okay, that's what's up. You heard it. If you've been thinking about it, Steve said you can do it. So, Steve, earlier you talked about how you focus on high level kind of tasks when it comes to what you create. He's mentioned SEO and video and things of that nature. How do you become good at that? What if I yeah, electrical engineer Steve figured out SEO. I don't got that skill set naturally. How can, since these are things that, like you said, you can create at one point and it continues to be profitable for you later on. How do we get better at these high level things? And our, in addition to what you mentioned around SEO and video creation, are there some other things that we should be focused on as well?
I'm curious. Do you still have your first podcast episode that you ever created lying around somewhere?
Oh yeah, it's not
Yeah.
public, but I got it.
I got mine too. I got my first video. It's horrible.
Absolutely atrocious.
Yeah. I took it down finally. I remember I was gonna leave it up because people were asking, and I was using it to prove a point in my class, but I was just so embarrassed by it. The point is that you're gonna suck at it in the beginning. It just takes time, man.
And here's the thing. I thought, not I thought, I gave my absolute best effort. And it was the best that I could do at that time. But now it's awful.
Yeah, video is even worse because you can see your face. Believe me. I spent so much time editing that first video that I published, and it was looking back, it was horrible. Things just take time to sink in. You're not going to be good at anything when you first start, and that's why you got to make that commitment. To if you're going to choose to do this, make sure you're in it for the long haul. Like I don't start anything unless I know I'm going to maintain it for at least 3 years minimum. And but the people I teach, I say, hey, you got to stick with it for at least a year. A year is like the bare minimum.
Yeah. Now, for this concept, because again, you're asking us to shift our paradigm because, especially if we're in business and especially if we've been really contemplating and researching business, we've been reading the opposite of what you're teaching as far as the prioritization of business and family. Do you have any examples of people who have taken on your philosophy and seen some positive change as a result of having a family first business
Yeah,
or
I mean, I
mindset?
think the best example of this, and I take no responsibility for this. Pat Flynn, he's a mutual friend
Yeah.
of ours.
Smart
Uh,
passive income.
Smart passive income. He's actually in the book. Like I used his story in the book. I think he's like a great example of how he balances family with all the different things. Like, he's got more stuff going on than I do. And what I love about him is that he incorporates his family into his videos, and it just seems like a lot of fun. That's something that I want to do with my kids too. He just has a lot of fun with a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
So
That's super
there's a
dope.
good example.
Now, as we continue or as we conclude in this journey of building or becoming a family first entrepreneur, there may be some people who are skeptical, A, about their ability to be successful in business at all. That's why they've been sitting on the idea for so long and haven't executed the idea. What words of encouragement would you have to get them into motion? And then in that encouragement, how would you encourage them to have this mindset about not grinding yourself to burnout, but building in a way that allows you to do the things that you love?
I can sum that up in one sentence. You're not going to feel ready to start your business until 6 months after you've already started your business. A lot of things that you can't learn until you do it. That's the reality. You can read a lot of books, you can take courses. Nothing's going to prepare you because there's always little details. Nothing's black and white in business. There's always shades of gray, and it's those shades of gray that you're going to need to figure out on your own. So less thinking. Here's what's ironic. Like whenever I have an engineer that signs up for my class, I'm like, oh God, this guy's is not gonna, because engineers, because I am one, they want to make sure that whatever they do is guaranteed to succeed. They try to gather all this data to convince them. Ironically, the students in my class who are the most successful don't think about any of those things. They just barrel right through and they just kind of figure it out on the fly. That's kind of the mentality that you need to have, because you got nothing to lose, really. I mean, starting a business today and online, like how much did it cost you to start your podcast?
500. That's what this company started with 9 years ago. $500.
We started our e-commerce store for $630. It's not expensive. So you may as well do it.
May as well do it. Steve, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for writing this book. Your book is fantastic. I told you that off the air, but I want to say it on the air as well. It's called The Family First Entrepreneur. I recommend it. Even if you have an inkling of entrepreneurship in your bones, please get a copy of this brand new book. We have a link to it in the show notes of this episode. Before we let you go, Steve, let people know about your YouTube channel, your podcast, and all the ways they can keep up with you and what you got going on.
Yeah. So first and foremost, pick up the book over at thefamilyfirstentrepreneur.com. I'm giving out some amazing bonuses. If you get the book, I will give you a 3-day workshop on how to get started selling in e-commerce, a 2-day workshop that will walk you through how to make money through blogging, podcasting, and YouTubing. And then I'm also doing this 6-week Family First Challenge, which is starting in June. I'm not sure when this episode's coming out, but I'll be in a private Facebook group with you guys for 6 weeks, helping you to figure out what your next side hustle is going to be. You can also find me over at mywifequitterjob.com. I offer a free 6-day mini course also if you're interested in just figuring out whether e-commerce is really for you. And I also run a training class over at profitableinlinestore.com. I run a podcast called My Wife Quit Her Job. My YouTube channel is the same name. If you guys ever want to hang out in person, I run an annual e-commerce conference called the Sellers Summit. It's too late this year, but if you want to hang out in person next year, you can do it. And most importantly, if you guys are getting married, I can hook you up with some handkerchiefs over at bumblebeelinens.com.
I love it. Thanks, Steve. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and insight and your story with us on today's episode. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Another fantastic edition of the His and Her Money Show is complete. Everything that Steve mentioned, all the resources and tools that he talked about, you can find links to those in the show notes of this episode. We hope that you're ready to take action. That's why I told you to have your pen and paper ready. I told you it was coming. So I hope you took good notes and now you're ready to take good action. Again, the name of his new book is called The Family First Entrepreneur. Get your copy right now and get your journey started, or get your journey into the next gear. That's all we got for this time, guys. It's been great. Until next time, peace.